Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
We begin this hour in Washington. President Trump leaving the door open for trade talks and piling on the pressure for the Fed to cut interest rates.
We're still willing to talk. Literally every country wants to make a deal. We have no inflation. Our stock market hit record highs. With no inflation, we should be at 1%. Thanks as well to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who's doing a fantastic job. He goes on television and he calms the market. I go on television, I rile the market.
It's time for some calm. Joining us now, the 79th Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the program, sir. Let's pick up on that theme. Not you calming the markets, but on inflation and where rates should be. As Annmarie pointed out, we've had a string of softer than expected inflation reads in this country. We've had 4. We might get 5 at 8:30 Eastern time. Why do you believe that's signal and not noise?
Well, I mean, there's some persistence there, Jonathan. And look, I do have access to the number the night before, but when I'm coming on TV, I don't look at it. So I don't know what the number is going to be at 8:30. And I wouldn't, I don't know whether it's going to be down, up, or flat, but I wouldn't put too much emphasis on one number. I think it's the trend, and I think one thing that Wall Street, a lot of economists, market in general got wrong early on was that tariffs were going to cause a substantial price level rise, which just hasn't happened.
And there are some people on the FOMC, the Federal Reserve, still worried about the prospect of that happening through the summer. We've all sensed the frustration from the White House across the administration with Fed Chair Jay Powell. And a lot of confusion, I think, at this point that maybe we can address in this conversation. Is firing the Federal Reserve Chair under active consideration in the White House, in the Treasury, in your administration?
President Trump said numerous times he's not going to fire Jay Powell. He's working the refs, and I've said before, I'm a basketball fan. There are 2 schools of working the refs. There's the Bobby Knight School, and there's the Dean Smith School. President Trump seems to prefer the Bobby Knight School, and I'll tell you, I went back over the weekend and looked, and Bobby Knight won 3 NCAA championships. My hero, Dean Smith, only won 2.
The NEC director, Kevin Hassett, I'm not sure what you'd call him, but he was asked over the weekend, can the Fed chair be fired? He said that's a thing that's being looked into. How should we understand those comments?
Look, and I will point out, Kevin was a collegiate basketball player. And I think, as President Trump said, he's not looking to fire Chair Powell. And as I've said, I'm not going to comment on future policy or future mistakes the Fed will make. I'll only comment on past mistakes. And look, they've had some big forecasting errors, and this may be one now.
Is there a reason for not firing him? And I ask that question because the president's also said that his term is about to expire in May of next year. Is that the reason to ultimately just wait? Or is it something else? Are you convinced by the negative consequences associated with such a move?
Look, I think an independent central bank is very important for the conduct of monetary policy, and we can see that in terms of both the financial markets, the term premium, and longer-term debt.
You said previously the interview process would begin later on in the fall. There's been plenty of speculation as to whether that process would be brought forward. Mr. Secretary, do you still, as far as you understand, believe that's when the interview process to replace the Fed chair will begin in the fall, or has a formal process already started?
Well, look, there's a formal process that's already starting. There are a lot of great candidates, and we'll see how rapidly it progresses. It's President Trump's decision, and it will move at his speed.
Do you see any merit at all in selecting maybe a candidate that's already on the committee on the FOMC versus taking a look at someone outside of the Federal Reserve?
Again, there are a lot of good candidates inside and outside the Federal Reserve, Jonathan.
Has the chairman himself, the Fed Chair Jay Powell, given you any indication whatsoever as to what he would do once his term has expired? Will he vacate his seat as the governor of the Federal Reserve?
Well, traditionally, the Fed chair also steps down as a governor, and there's been a lot of talk of a shadow Fed chair causing confusion in advance of his or her nomination. And I can tell you, I think it'd be very confusing for the market for a former Fed chair to stay on also.
Mr. Treasury Secretary, I'd love to talk to you about what's going on in Nvidia this morning. Jensen Huang, the CEO, out in a blog statement saying that the company has, quote, provided an update to customers, noting that Nvidia is filing applications to sell the H20 GPU again. The U.S. government has assured the company that licenses will be granted, and Nvidia hopes to start deliveries soon. Can you attest whether or not that's true or not? The United States is willing to let Nvidia sell H20s once again in China?
Well, again, Annmarie, I think that'd be a judgment that the Chinese indigenous manufacturers, namely Huawei and some others, already have an equivalent chip. So, if there's an equivalent chip, then the Nvidia H20 could be sold, because I can tell you the one thing that we do not want is a digital Belt and Road springing up around the world, because other countries or China are substituting for our American chip manufacturers.
This is the same chip, though, that the Trump administration blocked with export controls in April. So why the change in policy now?
Annmarie, you might say that that was a negotiating chip that we used in Geneva and in London.
So this was part of the trade talks when it comes to Washington and Beijing?
Yes.
Was it a quid pro quo then? As you said, it wasn't, but was it potentially to make sure that you can get the licenses when it comes to rare earths?
Yeah, I think it was all part of a mosaic. They had things we wanted, we had things they wanted, and we're in a very good place. I expect to meet my Chinese counterpart, the vice premier, in the next few weeks.
So when and where will that meeting take place?
We're still working on that. The Chinese leadership has a big conclave at the beginning of August, so we're trying to work out whether that could be in a third country before or after that conclave.
Will the administration release the framework of the Geneva and London talks?
Well, we have released some of it, and I'll tell you that now, having settled on tariffs, on the export controls, we can move on to the next stage of talks. And I think it's very important, both for the global economy, for the U.S. economy, and for the Chinese economy, for us to move on and talk about China opening its markets and the increased domestic and consumer production there.
Are you hoping to get to that next phase before August 12th, when that's currently the détente between these two economies?
Yeah, I think we're in a very good place, and I tell market participants not to worry about August 12th.
Should they worry about what's happening with Europe with respect to the 30% tariff rate? They don't seem to be worrying, but I'm just curious whether that's the final rate or whether the letter was part of a negotiation that Europe received from President Trump.
Well, Lisa, what I would say is President Trump's able to create a lot of leverage here, because he's indifferent. He's indifferent whether we take in the 30% rate or whether the Europeans come to us with a much better deal. As I've been saying for a while, that if countries or trading blocs don't come with their best deals, then the rates could boomerang back. So President Trump's leading this, and what I will tell you is that a lot of the deals, and this is where his leadership's been invaluable, a lot of the deals that I thought were excellent deals keep getting improved upon every time he takes up the maximum pressure strategy.
There is a theory in markets, and you don't even have to calm them. They're pretty calm. They're watching all of these rates, and they're not freaking out in parlance on Wall Street. They're taking this in stride. We're close to all-time highs, if not at all-time highs. Do you see this as giving a green light to Trump, to President Trump, to keep going, to take hardline approaches, and to keep trying to get better and better deals?
Look, I think this narrative of this obsessive focus on the market isn't right. President Trump views this as a generational opportunity to reset trade in a fair and sound manner for the American people. So the idea that some market ups or downs are going to be the deciding factor here is what we are concerned about, and President Trump is laser focused on, is getting the best deals, because we were not having fair trade, and now we're seeing, with these countries coming to the table, the quality of the deals gets better and better. So we're not going to rush just because of some market deadline. Now, I think what the market's seeing is market's willing to look forward 3, 6, 12 months, and this is going to be good for the U.S., it's going to be good for the global economy.
If you do get some sort of signal from the market, though, that this isn't going to be good for the U.S. economy, is there a trigger point? Is there sort of a sense at which it acts as a gut check and sort of pulls back some of the negotiating tactics?
Look, I think the market understands what we're doing. Sometimes individual market people don't. Sometimes the television personalities don't. But good thing about President Trump is he always tells you what he wants, and what he wants is fair trade here.
I won't take that as a slight on me and my colleagues around the table, Mr. Treasury Secretary, but you did tell me on April 2nd, on Liberation Day, that this was the ceiling when it comes to those rates. But since then, we have actually had some tariff rates the president announced in letters higher than those rates he announced on that big chart on April 2nd. So is there no longer a ceiling when it comes to tariff rates when you are dealing with trading partners?
I think that I said if they come and they negotiate in good faith, then those are ceilings. And some of the talks got off to very slow starts.
So who's negotiating in good faith at this moment and who's not?
Again, I congratulated the UK the other day, as I told many of our trading partners, and Annmarie, I may have said on that day or a few days after April 2nd, I'd advise countries to move quickly, because with President Trump, the first deals are usually the best deals. And the UK came in early. They got a great deal, and everybody else is kind of dragging right now. Well,
when it comes to Japan, you're headed there at the end of this week. Do you expect to come back with a deal?
I'm going to Japan to represent the United States government and the American people at the International Expo, which we used to know as the World's Fair. So this coming Saturday is going to be America's Day, and I'll be taking a delegation, includes the Labor Secretary, Deputy Secretary of State, will be representing the U.S. So this is a celebration of the U.S. more than trade talks.
Mr. Secretary, before you go, just a final question. I'm embarrassed to say that my knowledge of college basketball is nothing like yours, but I can tell you back in the 90s in English football, there used to be a concept of player managers. There used to be certain managers of football teams that also put themselves on the field, and they played too. Effectively, they had two jobs. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, whether that's something you'd be interested in. We've seen that throughout the administration. Is that something you think that you could pursue, both the Treasury Secretary and the Fed chair?
Look, I think I have the best job in town. I will do what President Trump wants. We got a lot of great Fed candidates, and I'm confident it's going to be a robust process, Jonathan.
Has he asked you?
What's that?
Has he asked you? Are you part of the process?
I am part of the decision-making process, but again, it's the final decision is going to be President Trump's.
Mr. Secretary, appreciate your time. Thank you. The Treasury Secretary there, Scott Bessent, on a range of issues, including trade and the future of this Federal Reserve.